the end of the 7.5 years, having a bit of an itch, thinking about, again, what's my next move. And so I started looking around actually during the pandemic. I'm now at Osler, back in private practice. So it's a bit of an unconventional path, as I said. And I've been back in private practice for 7, almost 8 months now. Still practicing real estate law, but what's interesting is I find my in-house experience has certainly added to my practice, because there were things that I had picked up during my in-house role that has actually been very handy and useful in terms of my private practice now. And I'm happy to obviously get into a bit of that as we progress. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you very much. I see also we have lots of people joining now. The tech issue seems to be resolved, thankfully. We've also started recording this so that if anyone is still having technical issues, you'll be able to access the recording. So hopefully that solves the issues. Thank you for bearing with us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christina. Please give us your journey to where you are now.
Thanks, Anastasia. I think I was called to the bar probably before most of you were born, so I'm not sure I want to give the year, but anyway, I joined General Motors in 1987. Oh my goodness. This is where I feel quite old. I went to law school at Western. They called it University of Western Ontario then, but now I think it's called just Western University. I articled at a large firm called Borden and Elliott, which I chose for the wonderful reason that I like their furniture. It was very different back then. There was no internet, hard to research things. It was just totally different environment. And now it's BLG, as you all know. From there, well, during that time, I realized I didn't like downtown Toronto. I wanted to see trees and grass and snow, not slush. So I kind of knew my path wasn't in downtown Toronto. In the mid 80s, the economy was really bad, so a lot of us didn't have jobs and got called to the bar. So after that, I went to a small firm in Whitby, actually, and practiced there for a year with, there was 4 of us at firm, so I have experience at a small firm. And then I ended up getting an offer at General Motors of Canada. And my boss at the small firm at the time said to me, "Oh, so you're going to go work for the CAW?" And I'm like, "No, General Motors has its own lawyers." He just assumed it was like CAW work, which it wasn't. And I stayed there for nearly 31 years and retired at the end of April in 2018. And during that time, I had the opportunity to practice in a wide variety of areas, mostly commercial, real estate, franchise law. I did environmental law for a number of years. By the time I left, I was corporate secretary as well to the board, so that was interesting. I did human rights for a period of time, and the only area I think I really didn't touch on was labor law, which was, I never quite liked that in law school either, so that was fine with me. And after I retired, people said, "Oh, you're going to go back to work." I said, "Oh, no, I'm not." So I was retired for about 5 years, and at that point, my husband was semi-retired. He was consulting, and then he got an offer to go work at the region of Peel. My husband is the co-lead for the mass vaccination planning committee for the region of Peel. So you can imagine what our life is like these days. I'm also a chef now. I just make him all his meals because he's on the phone nonstop working. And so I went back to TELUS to handle someone's maternity leave, the associate general counsel of real estate. So I did that for 18 months, and I had people reporting to me like I did when I was at General Motors. And it was an opportunity, I thought, late in my career for personal growth to see how another company handled a legal staff, another large company, and being a Canadian company versus a Canadian company with a US parent. And I found that really a different type of experience. And then when I retired from there, which was my second retirement, I became basically like a sole practitioner, and I work for TELUS on a part-time basis, and I do dockets and mostly in real estate and energy law, wind farms, solar farms, that kind of thing, which is very interesting. And the business aspect of practicing law in-house, I think, was really what kept me there all those years. I don't think there's probably anyone on the phone or in this webinar who will stay somewhere for like 30 years. It just doesn't seem to be in the makeup of people. and I can't say as I blame them. It was just a different time, and it worked for me and my family situation, but it was a great career when I look back on it. I don't think I would have done too much different, really. When my son got married, he gave me a card the day he got married and talked to me about how he thought I had sacrificed wages and money. But I was in town. I lived in Whitby for most of my career at General Motors, and how I could take time off to be at a school and those kind of things, and how much he appreciated that. That was from Sean, Anastasia. So it was, I know Anastasia because her mother and I are very good friends, by the way. So I actually have known Anastasia since she was born. That's why I know I've been around for longer than most of you are alive. So anyways, that's how I am right now. And now I have to dock it, and I have to admit I hate it. I don't know how you do, Iris. And
I still hate it,
my
but I have to do it.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah. Legal tracker is not my friend. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you,
You're
Christine.
welcome.
That's actually a very, very sweet story. Okay, Lana, I'll turn it over to you. Can you tell us about your path, please?
Sure, I can tell you a bit about my path. I'm probably the only non-lawyer in the room, but for the last 20 plus years, I have been working with law firms and corporate legal departments to help them build out their legal teams. At first, I was working on the support side, but for the last 12 or 13 years, I've been focusing solely on lawyers, helping them build their careers, and helping corporate legal departments, I guess, is more important for today, but also law firms nationally and internationally build their legal capabilities. I kind of fell into this role after teaching English in South Korea for 5 years and returning to Canada and taking a job at a recruitment firm. And I just found that it worked. More on, I guess I've always been more focused on the long-term career goals for the lawyers and what the corporations need to build their team, and trying to find that match.
Thank you, Lana. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your paths here. I think it's helpful for everyone to get a sense of all the different wonderful ways that people can get where they are. So that's great to hear. I think we are now up and running tech-wise. So what we'll do now is get, now that we have a sense of all our panelists, we'll get a sense of the audience as well. And we have a poll. So if we could get the first poll question up for our audience. Perfect. Oh, here we go. Excellent. So the first question is, what is your year of call? Obviously, this one's a pretty basic one, and will help us get a sense of where everyone is in their career path. And I can see the answers are already starting to roll in. The second question is, what is your current practice setting, whether it's private practice, in-house, government, or somewhere else? I see there's a lot of private practice coming in, some in-house as well. And the last one, or the second last one is, are you considering a move in-house? I think this one is fairly self-explanatory given the subject matter that we're chatting about today. And it does seem that there are lots of people considering a move in-house. And then the last one, or sort of follow up to that question, is, are you actively applying for roles right now? So we'll give everyone a moment here. It looks like the majority of people have voted, and we have, I'm not sure if our panelists are able to see this, but we have 52% in their first year or second year of practice. So welcome, everyone. Welcome to being a lawyer. It's a very fun and interesting, engaging career, and we're going to talk more about that. We have 23% in 3 to 5 years of call, and 27% in 4 to 6 years of call. Our practice settings. So it looks like we have lots of private practice. 70% is private practice. So I think I can guess the outcome of the next question. 22% is in-house, and then we have 9% to people working in other practice settings. It looks like the majority of people, 83%, are considering a move in-house. Welcome, you're in the right place. We have lots of great information for you coming up. And 17% are not considering a move. And of those, we have about half and half, just slightly less, looking actively for roles, and 57% not actively looking for roles. So that's wonderful. That gives us a really good sense of who is watching. And so we can keep that in mind as we move through. Please do remember to ask us your questions, and we'll answer those. I'm glad it seems like everyone's been able to log in now. So we'll just jump right into it. Now that everyone has introduced themselves, and thank you again for that, I will toss out the first question to Sam and Iris to discuss some of the main differences, having done both private practice and working in-house, between those two settings. What are they? What are the ones that stick out most to you?
Do you want me to take it first?
Away you go.
Okay, sure. So I think it's a very interesting question. I think, there are a few main differences that I can think of. I would say one of the main difference is the breadth and depth of your experience and expertise. So when you're in private practice, you are the subject matter expert. And so what happens is your clients look to you for an in-depth knowledge and understanding of your area of law and its intricacies and complexities. That could be corporate commercial, that could be real estate in my case, it could be tax, it could be labor employment, which Christina hates, or it could be privacy. It could be a whole array of different areas of law. But on the other hand, I think when you're in-house, I think all the panelists who have been in-house, and myself included, would agree that your experience tends to be broader when you are in-house. Perhaps not as deep, but you have the institutional knowledge associated with the organization that you work for. And that's an important context to put in mind, to have in mind, because legal issues which arise in the course of your organization's operations rarely fall squarely into just one area of law. They tend to fall in different buckets. They are related. And they tend to involve at least, I would say, a few areas of law. So you have to know at least a bit enough to be able to spot issues in the different areas of law. Another distinction that comes to my mind, I think, has to do with the fact that we need to recognize in-house lawyers are part of the business. And so when that happens, your in-house clients usually expect more than just legal advice from you. They're looking for a holistic business relationship. I have had many in-house clients come to me asking for my opinion, business, my views on business issues, not strictly legal, or asking me for help on, how do I do a presentation, a deck, to ensure, it would be more well received perhaps at the board. So not strictly legal issues, but I think when you're good and you know what you're doing, people tend to come to you for all sorts of issues. Also important to recognize when you're in-house is you are part of a cost center. You are not generating revenues. There is never enough, I would say, time, money, or people. So, and you have to get used to it. That's never going to change. And so one of the challenges when you're in-house is you have to figure out how to work with what you have, your limited resources, because your legal budget is going to be limited. And you have to focus on how to get things done, how to get more done, and how to get things done efficiently. In other words, I think when you're in-house, you have to learn to do more with less. And learn to be as efficient as possible, because we all know budgets across the board are getting tighter, and there's just an upswing in the volume of legal work generally, whether it's in-house or not. Another thing that I was thinking about when I was prepping for this panel is I think when you're in-house, you need to understand and know your client's business inside out. I literally mean you have to have a thorough understanding of the business of your client and your operations. That's your only client. So you need to know almost everything, as I said, the ins and outs. And you need to learn to think very deeply about the business so that you can think strategically and represent your only client, and to represent your client effectively. And so what that also entails is you have to have a pulse on the company. But you also have to be sensitive to the environment that you operate in. And what that means is you have to understand what your internal clients value, what matters to them, what is important to them, understand the pressures and the constraints that they're operating under, that they're facing and experiencing. But equally, understand what their pain points are, what they find frustrating. That's very, very important when you're in-house. And I guess the final point before I pass it over to others, so I'm not monopolizing, is I would say when you're in-house, you have to be practical in your advice as much as possible. It doesn't help to just provide a legal answer that doesn't work in the business world, because your job is to facilitate what needs to get done in the business. So make sure that your advice works in the real business world. And the last thing I would end on is, don't let perfect stand in the way of good enough. I think when you're in-house, good enough is good enough, and you move on.
Thank you, Iris. That's I think all very, very helpful. Sam, I'll turn it over to you as well.
That's hard to follow, Iris. You hit all the points that I had, but I mean, I would echo that completely. So, when you go in-house, you're elbow to elbow with the business client. You're not sitting in a separate office getting a discrete legal issue. Sometimes you're not even sure what you're receiving from the business. Sometimes you're sitting in on a meeting and you're listening and observing, and then you need to recognize that there's a potential issue. So it's not as cleanly presented, I guess I would say. It's a little messy. And I would agree that perfection cannot be the standard. The business is looking for a practical solution. They're looking for one that will be easy to operationalize while being able to sufficiently manage the risk. And what struck me when I moved in-house is I was coming from financial services. So that was my bread and butter. And when I moved over, you become the lawyer, not the financial services lawyer. So you're getting questions about real estate, employment, all of these different areas. So Iris, exactly what you said about needing to be that kind of the jack of all trades is definitely crucial in an organization. What I've also found really interesting is sometimes the business, they're really siloed. They're running in their own directions. They have their own initiatives, and legal sometimes is that function that is seeing everything. And as a result of that, legal has to be the one to say, okay, someone else is doing that, or have you checked in with this team, and kind of putting together the, or connecting the dots rather. So I found that's also really interesting. From a resource perspective, when I switched over, I don't know why I thought this. I maybe thought that there would be like a precedent database with platinum, gold, silver, like a memo library, really, really just like an incredible level of organization, like what you would see at a firm, and kind of came into saying, okay, so we have stuff. There are different things sitting in different places, and you make the decision, right? Like, what's the best use of the time? So I think what I learned very quickly being in-house was, how do you get to that end result in that effective manner? You might not be able to check every single box, but you have to check the box that matters. You have to manage the risk. You have to give a practical solution that the business can work with. So that would be kind of my 2 cents on that one.
Thank you. I think that's very helpful. Definitely some similar themes, I think, from both of you, which is great for people who are looking to make a move, so that they know what to expect. Sticking with the same sort of theme of private practice versus in-house, and the differences there, one of the main things we hear in the industry is that you need to spend 3 to 5 years in private practice, which I think we've already heard a couple of people say that they didn't do. So grain of salt there, but we hear that sort of idea often, that you need to spend whatever these first couple of years in private practice. Some people even say you have to spend them on Bay Street in big law before moving in-house. So I'll ask Lana, from a recruitment perspective, how much truth is there to that? And are we seeing shifting attitudes in that from both like the younger generation of lawyers that are coming up, but also perhaps as a result of the pandemic itself?
So first off, I'd say you don't need to spend 2 to 5 years in private practice to make that move in-house. I've met a lot of people throughout my career who've had incredibly successful careers all in-house. That being said, there are going to be some in-house roles where the general counsel or someone hiring has that thought in their mind that I only want someone who has been trained in big law. So I think it just really depends on the role. I think as long as you go somewhere, if you're quite junior, that you have a solid mentor and you can get good training, because that's what they're focusing on when they're talking about people spending, 2 to 5 years in private practice. They think that the training is exceptional there, especially in big law. Yet I know some general counsels who would be much better at training and mentoring someone and bringing them up in the true broad nature of an in-house practice. And so I think if that is where you're focused, then you just need to focus on going to the right in-house role.
If I can jump in for a minute, Anastasia, and make a comment. Depending on the firm that the company that you're with, some in-house departments have 50, 60 lawyers. So for example, at TELUS, they were very specific. We had 4 lawyers doing real estate, for example, and then they have so many lawyers doing litigation and 1 lawyer specifically doing pensions. So it cuts a little bit back to the first question, is that depending on the company you're at, you might not be such a generalist. You might actually have depth of knowledge that someone externally would have. And never shortchange yourself on what the experience that you have, the knowledge you have being in-house is when you are giving instructions to external counsel, because no matter how they try, as Iris mentioned, they don't know the business like you know the business. And you're there as a trusted advisor. Even if you're only 2 years out, one of the differences I think between in-house and at a large law firm, for example, is at a large law firm, you're going to be working with, a partner, senior associate, etc. When you're in-house, you're their lawyer. So you are responsible to give them the advice. And you don't have anyone to fall back on. So the idea Lana said about a mentor is really important. And also really important if you have a connection, and a really good connection with an external, we would call them outside counsel. Wouldn't call them outhouse counsel, but outside counsel, that you can bounce ideas off of from time to time can be very helpful as well. A lot of companies now have rules about, so for example, you can't go out for lunch with external counsel, and you can't, it's a gifts and gratuities basically policy, where in some ways it's kind of offensive. They think that because someone buys you lunch that they're buying your willingness to hire them. It's a bit offensive from an integrity perspective, but it also takes away the ability just to shoot the breeze with someone and ask them a bunch of questions. So I think a mentor is very important, and also not just on the legal side, but on the business side, someone you can ask a question to. Like when I was doing dealer network work at General Motors, it was good for me. I had a really good relationship with the director of dealer marketing, and I could say, okay, how does this work? We had 700 dealers at that point across Canada. Like, how would this work under the dealer sales and service agreement versus how it would work under a real estate agreement, for example. So mentors are very important.
Thank you. Thank you both. Oh, sorry, I just got some feedback there. Sticking with the maybe misconceptions about in-house, maybe a better way, having heard everyone's thoughts on that. One thing we hear is that in-house is associated with a better, and I'll use giant quotes here, work-life balance. That's something we hear quite a lot. And obviously, because a couple of people have said, and I certainly agree, not having to docket is wonderful, but what does your day actually look like in terms of hours? And is it just a different balance, or is it noticeably better, so to speak, in-house? And maybe I'll start with Stephanie, and then we can go back to Christina for that.
Sure. I think, and I hate that answer, but it depends. It does depend. First of all, it depends on the industry. Some industries are more reactive. For example, if you work in retail, you are, I'll give you specific examples of situations just to exemplify the fact that there's no standard way. There's no typical day, really. It really depends on what, you don't know what's going to be on your desk when you get to work. I've been in situations where, COVID hit and you're in the retail sector, and, it's Sunday night, and the government, it sends a government order saying that as of Monday, retails have to cease doing this or have to, stop selling that. And the business sends it to you and says, hey, you know what? This is how we have to comply it for tomorrow, Monday. And it's Saturday afternoon. There goes your Saturday, and there goes your weekend, because you're going to spend the weekend trying to interpret, what the government guideline is and what they can do and what they cannot do. And there's going to be follow-up questions. So that's the role of an in-house counsel as well. I've been in situations where the CEO was meeting with the prime minister, or another, like a company, like an industry council Monday. And yes, that means that we have to prepare a memo during the weekend. That's a situation. You can be in a situation where, and that's happened as well, where you're negotiating a technology contract that has to be signed absolutely before the end of the quarter, because the license will expire. And if it's not signed by Friday, potentially on Monday, the whole company, all 200,000 employees of the companies, won't have access to Microsoft Word, right? Or to any type of software. So there are situations in-house that are extremely time sensitive. And in this situation, there's no in-house versus private practice. It's really about you delivering what is expected by your client and just being there for them and providing that advice. That being said, you can be enrolled, and I think Christina mentioned it, legal departments have varying, it depends on what you do, basically. I've been in companies where I was the only lawyer, or there was two of us. So we really are jack of all trades, and we really just do everything that comes. I'm currently in a company where we're 200 lawyers. The legal department has 200 lawyers. This is as bigger than a lot of law firms. And it is organized in a way that is similar to law firms as well, where, I'm part of a team and I handle this. Like if I'm technology, innovation, AI, emerging tech, etc. So I will never work on real estate. I will never work on, I don't do transactions. I don't do transactional work anymore, which that's been my experience for the past 13 years. But in that role, I do projects, right? And the great thing with projects is that there is a timeline. So you know exactly that this project needs to be delivered that day. So you work around, it's a long-term effort. So you have recurring meetings with the business, you have follow-ups, etc. And you raise all types of things. It could be IP related problems or privacy, etc. But it happens over a long period of time. So you don't have the rush that you may have in certain industries or in certain roles, because it's not transactional work and it's not, as reactive, like, oh, there's a government order, we have to do it, right? So That's been my experience. It really depends on the structure and on your role within legal as well. I don't know if some of you do labor law, for example. It's a completely different reality, right? If you do litigation, if you do M&A work, I know that RBC, where I currently work, again, we are 200 lawyers, but all fields are represented. So my day-to-day is not the same as the M&A team's day-to-day, and it's not the same as the labor or the real estate, because so yeah.
Thank you. That gives us, certainly someone like me who has never been in-house, a very good picture of the different sort of, it depends options. I think that was a very helpful answer. So thank you. Christina, I'll turn it over to you as well and see if you have anything to add.
Sure. It depends is a good way of putting it. I think there are a few things you can say for sure. None of us got into the practice of law because we wanted a 9-to-5 job. If we wanted that, we would have chose a different career. So it is busy, and gone are the days when people used to think, oh, you're in-house, you're working 9 to 5. That's just not reality. And especially an in-house lawyer's role is to be a trusted advisor, not even just to give legal advice, but as Syl mentioned, give legal advice in the context of the business, and also look out for the business, because your client in the end is the company you're working for. And you want to make sure that they follow the laws and aren't going to get themselves into some kind of jam. So maybe you could say the work-life balance is better. I would just say that it's different. I mean, depending on if you're a labor lawyer, for example, and there's a collective agreement with your unionized employees, you're not getting much sleep. When the deadline comes up, you are working 24/7. There was a time at General Motors, some of you may remember when General Motors was getting a loan from the federal government, so it didn't have to file under the CCAA. And at that time, I was in charge of getting the company ready to file. So I worked like basically 24/7 for nearly a year. And there was no one working any harder externally than I was internally. Now, there are times when the projects you're working on have a bit of a break, and you can, have a better work-life balance, and maybe you can slip out in the middle of the day, and maybe that's a function of you live closer to your family, depending on where you're, what company you work at. And you can slip out and go to some of the kids' events, which is really obviously very nice. But you also have no one to delegate to unless you want to delegate to external counsel. And that's expensive depending on, what range of lawyer you hire and what their hourly rate is. I mean, if you hire an associate versus if you hire a senior partner, it depends what you need in the circumstances. So you're at the whim of your clients. And you also have to remember that when you're in-house, you can't necessarily change your clients. Like you can't say, I don't really like that guy, I don't want to do his work anymore. Not maybe if you were outside counsel, maybe you could pass the file to someone else or get someone else to step in. Like, if you're the labor lawyer, you're the labor lawyer. And if the guy's a jackass, he's your client and you got to keep working with him. So which can create, even if you have an okay work-life balance, can create a lot of personal stress and anguish if there is someone internal that you don't like and don't get along with. So, and the longer you've been at a company, I think, as well, your clients look to you for guidance, not just necessarily the strict legal answer, but they don't want you to say, no, you can't do that. They want to say, no, you can't do that, but have you thought about X or Y? How about doing it that way? So I know that it depends answer is just a typical lawyer's answer, isn't it?
It would be unfitting if any of us gave any other answer.
Yeah.
No, thank you both, though. I think that really paints a nice picture of both the differences and similarities with the ubiquitous work-life balance question that we always get. I'm going to pivot a little bit now to talk about compensation. So one thing, of course, that people flag is the difference in compensation, particularly in salary, between working in a firm and working in-house. And I know another thing that is often tricky especially for new calls, and I appreciate we have a lot of new calls in the audience today, is how to deal with that question in terms of what your salary expectation is. That can be something that's a little hard to talk about for some of us, but also to talk about in terms of knowing what to ask for in terms of compensation more broadly, not just salary, when it comes to working in-house. So I'll turn that question over. Maybe from a recruitment perspective, we can get Lana's thoughts on that, and then also hear from Iris.
Hi, sorry about that. I actually hate that question in an interview. What are your compensation expectations? Particularly for an in-house role, because generally in-house roles have certain salary bands that the job slots into. And so if you're working with a recruiter, you're always able to answer that question by saying, I understand the band for this role is X to Y, and I'm comfortable in that range. I think if you don't have any idea what the compensation is, a good way to respond to that is, I'd like to know more about what the total compensation is. I'm not only focused on base, I'm focused on the other benefits of the organization. That compensation isn't my main motivation for moving. And the final way I think you can answer that is say, I'm currently earning X, but I'm willing and open to have discussions because I'm really interested in this opportunity.
Right. That's helpful. I'm gonna, it's like a good one to store away. Iris, I'll turn it over to you as well to give your thoughts on that.
So I agree with Lana. I don't think it's right to just focus on the salary figure. I always ask about and consider the entire package, and the entire package can include things from benefits to pension to bonus structure. It depends on the organization. But I would say that question actually has come up a few times as well, in the course of my last 20 years when I was looking for a job. I think what's very important is to recognize the importance of doing your homework. You might be asked that question early on in the recruitment process. So research the market. There's usually a wealth of information available. So what you can do is speak with others in your network who may be in the same area of law or in a comparable organization. Look for salary trends and information published by recruitment firms like Lana's. There's actually information out there that you can tap into. Believe it or not, sometimes you might be able to find information in websites like Glassdoor, but I don't know how accurate they are, but that's another source. I think early on in the interview process, if you get that question, I agree with Lana. I tend to answer with a range. I think it's perfectly acceptable and in fact advisable to give a range because it shows some flexibility, and it also, give you some room to adjust as you find out more details about the role. But I've also been in, on the other side of the table when I was recruiting, and I've seen some very intelligent and smart interviewees turning the question around and asking the interviewers if there's a range that the organization has in mind for the position. So, I've also seen that done. But I would say, and I echo, Lana's comments too. I think as you proceed towards the later stages of the interview process, or even the last stage, I think it's acceptable to say, based on my skills and the value I believe I'll bring to the table, and now my understanding of what the role entails, I'm thinking about X as a starting salary. But I would also add on, what Lana has indicated, like indicate your interest in the position and not just money as the main factor in your decision.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's very good advice. I know, like we learned from our poll, we have a lot of people who are both considering a move and who are in their early stages of their career. So I think both of those, all that sort of advice and information will be very helpful. And actually on that note, as a reminder, we have the Q&A. So if you do have specific questions that come up as you're as you're listening to everyone's wonderful answers, please do put them in, and we'll reserve some time in a few moments to answer those. On the same issue of compensation, we wanted to take a moment to talk about the wage gap, because it's something that has been the subject of quite a lot of coverage from the Globe and Mail recently, of course, which everyone probably will have heard of, and seems to be a persistent issue in the legal industry. So as young women in law, we want to take a minute to talk about that, and in particular, ask whether this is something that comes up more or less in the in-house setting. I know that a lot of the coverage focuses on big firms. So to take it into this setting and learn a little bit about what, if any, that comes up in your practice. So maybe I'll turn it over to Stephanie first, and then we can hear from Lana as well, and Christina.
I've seen someone in the chat raise a point that I was about to make, the fact that once you are in-house, when you are in a law firm, I'm not sure how it works, but in-house, once you're hired at a certain salary, it's very difficult to increase. It increases very, very slowly, just like a standard employee, right? So the way to have the big bumps usually is to go from, legal counsel to senior legal counsel to change positions, basically. But I think we can come back to this later. But one of the things I've done to just always make sure that I'm paid what I deserve to be paid is I've created what we call a circle. But freshly out of law school, good friends of mine, we've decided that we would be very open and we would grow together. There's 5 of us in that circle, so to say. And the first time it happened very spontaneously and organically, where one of the friends, was about to accept an offer. She called me and she said, "Hey, you know what? I know you're currently working, in a similar company. What is fair for me to share the information? I know people have a very hard time sharing their salaries, benefits, and conditions, but you know what? Sharing is caring, and with trusted individuals, it can make the whole difference." Because that friend of mine, when she called me and asked, "Hey, you know what? Can I ask for," and she gave an amount, and I was like, "Of course you can. I think you can ask more than that, because this is where I am and we have a similar path." And she was so surprised. And just because of that conversation, she asked more than she thought she was entitled to, and she got it. So don't be afraid to share the information. I know I'm not trying to plug ZSA here, Lana, but I know that I have relied a lot on ZSA's, and probably other firms have it as well, but a salary guide that basically says, if you are between X and Y, your typical salary would be X, between X and Y in Montreal, in Toronto, in other cities. Throughout the past 13 years, I've worked with that guideline. And usually during an interview, I'm like, "Hey, ZSA says I'm worth," So it's something you can use.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I obviously come from a private practice background, but I think I also have used the ZSA guides. I think they're wonderful. I will echo that. And yeah, I agree. I think that it really sort of spoke to me when you're talking about having a trusted group of friends. That's something that I recently started doing. I'm a mid-level associate. I recently started doing with my sort of trusted group of friends, and it is just extremely beneficial, whether or not you're looking to move. Even if you're at a place that you love, you want to make sure that you're being compensated fairly. So I would just echo that. Even though I'm not in the in-house setting, I would certainly echo those. I think that's just generally great advice. I see also, I'm going to turn it over to Lana and Christina in just a moment, but I see we have a Q&A question that actually ties in nicely. So I may just throw it out and then we can answer it as we talk. But the question is it true that it takes advocating for yourself to be awarded a bonus year over year? And what can bonuses look like in-house? So maybe I will turn to Lana, and then we can go to Christina to hear your thoughts on those as well.
So most of the corporations that I would say that I work with, you don't have to advocate for yourself for a bonus. You create a performance plan, and at the end of the year, your performance and the company's performance is put together, and you get bonus based on that. But I certainly think that if it's in a less structured environment, people may have to advocate for a bonus. And I do think that when you're in compensation negotiations at the very beginning, when you're accepting a job, advocating for yourself is very important. And to not feel that when you receive an offer of employment, you have to accept everything that is in the terms. There's always points that you can negotiate, as long as you go into it with the appropriate mindset.
Sorry, I was trying to find my mute button. Thank you. I think that's a very good point as well. Sometimes it takes a little bit of courage, but I think it's never a bad thing to really advocate for yourself in that respect. Christina, I'll toss that question over to you as well, and maybe you and Stephanie can speak a little bit about the bonus question in particular that we just received from the audience.
Yeah. Were you actually wanting to some information about the gender gap potentially between men and women in-house counsel?
Yes, that was where our questions started, and then we kind of tumbled away, but yeah.
Okay, all right. I might go back to that and just speak to that a little bit as well.
Please do, yeah.
And I think I'm going to use the Stephanie, it depends answer again, but depending on the size of the company that you're working for, and as Lana said, most companies have structured bands that you would fall into. And then if you're within that band, it was like early 90s is when I noticed any kind of discrimination based on gender and pay. But since then, I think there are these bands and programs that are in place that I think really stop the most of that. Now, I haven't, in the two companies that I worked for, I didn't really experience that at all. And in fact, I don't think it was even part of the decision. When it comes to maternity leave, I know that, externally, young women say, if I take a maternity leave, is that going to hurt me moving up in my career? And I'm not sure about the impact at a law firm. In-house, I don't really think there is that much of an impact. I think that people respect a woman's right to take mat leave, and they do. Like, for example, the lady that I took her place at TELUS, it was her third child, she took 18 months. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my goodness, that's a long time to take off. And so I was there 18 months. She came back and she just slid right into the job, and there was, no issues at all. Do you have to blow your own horn when it comes to getting bonuses, et cetera? A lot of companies do have, as well as bands. In each band, they say if you're in this band, you can get up to 7% of your salary, let's say, in a bonus. If you're in this band, maybe you can get up to 30. And I think it doesn't hurt if you can't blow your own horn and do it in a nice, respectful way. But you'll often have a year-end, we used to call them PMPs, like a evaluation of your performance with your supervisor. And often they'll say to you, bring in your list of accomplishments. So they actually want you to point out the things that you've done in case they didn't realize it all, because depending on the size of the in-house department, if you have 200 lawyers and they're all going to meet, like at TELUS, for example, lawyers who were associate general counsels and above got together and we talked about all the senior counsel and counsels that reported up to us, because there's only so much money to go around. Okay, so do you think this person should get 100% of the bonus target or 110% or only 80%? And people would actually fight for their employees to get more money if they deserved it. And at that point, the vice president that I was reporting to, he asked for a list of specifically my accomplishments and also the accomplishments of the team that I was leading. So from that perspective, It's a good thing to keep track of, your accomplishments during the year. Sometimes your clients will actually even write you emails and they'll say, thank you so much, you did a great job. Make sure you keep those emails printed as well, because you never know what's going to happen with your computer. But from that perspective, I think it's important to be able to recognize your accomplishments and also recognize things you think you can improve on. And employers and supervisors like to hear that, I'd like to learn more about construction law, for example. I'd like to learn more about that next year. And they like it when you actually come up with ideas of things that you want to do for training purposes, for example. I'll turn it over to Stephanie.
Is there anyone else who, sorry, I didn't want to cut anyone else off if there was any other wage gap or just general answers to that question. We sort of melded it into a monster question, but
I think someone asked about the bonus, and I just wanted to comment on that. Just in most of I've worked at various companies, and in most of them, if not all, I'm going to say all of them, there was a bonus structure attached to the base salary. So it's not uncommon to have it. You have to be mindful of the fact that it's not because you are entitled to a bonus that you will get it. A lot of times, a lot of different criteria have to be hit that are not just linked to your own performance. They have to do with the company's general performance. So if the company doesn't hit the targets, no matter how amazing you've been, you may not get a bonus. And so you have to do your due diligence as well, because especially if you consider that bonus is part of the compensation, ask how often, like, has the bonus been paid historically? Because I've been in situations where, yes, we're entitled to a bonus, but no one has received the bonus for the past 3 years because the company hasn't hit the targets. So ask about how often the bonus has been paid, because you may just get surprises. And about so back to the fact that the salary doesn't increase so much, I hate to give that answer, but a lot of times if you want to see a big bump, big salary increase, you may have to change companies, unfortunately, because there is a maximum amount that, they're never going to go, like, you won't get a $20,000 increase. It's extremely rare that it's going to happen because company has policies that, there are maximum gaps that are increases that you can get in at once, right? So you may have to change companies, unfortunately.
But also, depending on the company, if they have different salary bands, moving from, a 8A to a 8B or a 9A, you can get a bigger bump that way. Promotion within, what they call it, a stationary promotion, where you get a promotion in your current role, but you really haven't changed jobs by virtue of your experience or whatever. So there is a way you can get more than the 2 or 3%. But it takes more work.
Christina, you've perfectly led into my next question, which is about career trajectory in-house and the best way to assess whether there is potential for growth within the company that you're looking at or within your own company. So maybe I'll actually have you speak about that, and then we can hear from Stephanie on that point as well.
So I think you have to be honest with yourself and think about, what does progressing in your career mean to you? Does it mean you want to be general counsel? You want to be associate general counsel? Or you want to learn different areas of law? Like you've done labor law, for example, and like maybe now you want to move into the tech side, or you want to be privacy commissioner. And depending on the size of the law department where you are, there might not be room for your traditional growth. If there's only, let's say, 4 lawyers and someone's general counsel and someone else is associate general counsel and they're in their 40s and they're not going anywhere, you have to think of other ways that you can satisfy your developmental urges from that perspective. One is different salary bands, and another one is you can look at whether or not you want to stay being a lawyer, for example. Like often lawyers in larger companies might decide they want to go into the business side of things. And that happens probably with relatively frequency. Someone who's a lawyer I know I don't know if anyone knows George McLean. He was a lawyer at General Motors, and then he moved into a business role, and then he left General Motors, and now he was president of I forget the name of the company, but he moved on from being a lawyer. So that's another way you can grow. But it's always not about the title. Sometimes it's about the responsibility in yourself and how your clients treat you. If you become more of a trusted advisor over time. And also another thing is, as you grow in your career, if you have the opportunity to mentor young lawyers, like near the end of my time at General Motors, I had 3 or 4 people reporting to me. And that actually gave me a lot of personal satisfaction that I could help younger lawyers and teach them the drafting skills that I learned when I was, throughout my career. And so that's another thing. So career development opportunities can mean different things to different people. And you have to look at the size and the type of law department that you're in a company to see what options are there. And, HR can also meet with you. Same thing with the last question, if you think you're not being paid fairly. I mean, HR professionals at a company have the obligation to keep conversations confidential. Having said that, if you raise something that would look like it's someone's breaking the law, don't think they're going to keep that. Like, for example, sexual harassment or discrimination in the workplace, they're not going to keep that confidential, because in the end, their responsibility is to the company, and they will have to go somewhere with that. But you can ask them questions about career path as well, and growing yourself as a lawyer is certainly a good career path as well.
Thank you. I think those are all great answers. I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie in just a minute. I noticed we have a couple of questions coming in the Q&A, which is fabulous. We'll get to them. I know we had a little bit of a slower start today. We have 15 minutes left. So we'll get through some of our questions that we had out planned. And then if people want to stay for just a couple of minutes, we'll try to get through the questions in the chat as well. I know we had a little bit of a rocky start, so hopefully we can just hang on for a couple extra minutes to make up that time. I'll turn it over to Stephanie to talk about assessing growth within a company.
Yes, Christina said a lot of the things I had in mind. As far as growth is concerned, I would start by you making it very clear what you like about your job. What is it that you like? Because sometimes when you're a professional, like a lawyer or something like that, what you like about your job may be very specific to the role. You want to have your hands in legal work. If that is the case, being on the management side may not be your thing, right? You may want to grow within the role, like go from being a legal counsel to perhaps being a senior legal counsel. Some people spend their entire career being a senior counsel because they're not interested in having a management role, because what they like to do is negotiating, drafting. They don't want to have to, do more of the, less having their hands less in the legal work. Another thing I want to say is being mindful of the titles. A lot of companies brand their legal team differently. Most companies, you will start up as being a legal counsel as an entry-level position. Some companies would call it senior manager legal as an entry level position. Most companies have senior counsel as the second sort of layer, or senior legal counsel or senior counsel. In other companies, it's going to be director legal. So it really depends, but be mindful that the title doesn't mean much. It's really about, are you a senior lawyer or a more junior lawyer? Are you having a management role or not? And in terms of and I'll finish with that, in terms of growth within the company, be very purpose-driven in terms of which company you're going to work for. A lot of times we're driven by opportunities, right? Oh, there's this company is looking for a legal counsel. I do legal, so I can do legal in aerospace, in agriculture, in retail, in banking, right? But when you're being tossed around by the various opportunities, it's very easy to lose the sense of purpose and why you became a lawyer to begin with. why you do what you do. What is it that you love about the industry that you're in, or else. So be very, always keep in mind what brought you to law first, because when you lose that, it's very easy to lose that, I think, when you're in-house, because again, you change companies, your client changes, and because you are part of an organization, it's easy to just adopt completely whatever purpose the organization has. So it becomes your own sort of purpose, right? Because you're part of that team. So pick an organization that has a purpose that works for you and that talks to you, because then you're able to grow within that organization, again, outside of legal, if that works for you, or within legal too. But yeah, go with what's in your heart in terms of picking an organization.
I think that's very good advice. I mean, just generally, but especially when looking at an organization, because I can imagine it would be easy to sort of get sucked into their goals and to remember yours as well. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the market, and I want to talk about diversity before we take some questions from the audience, because I know we have a couple. Oh, we have quite a few now. Wonderful. So I'll turn it over to Lana. I want to know, because we know we have quite a few people who are actually looking to actively make a change and are out there looking for a role, or to move into in-house, or maybe both. So can you tell us a little bit about where the market is now in terms of hiring? What industries are booming? What vintage level, as we say, are they looking for? Can you give us a debrief on that?
So good news is the market is probably busier than I've seen it since 2008, 2009. There is hiring happening across the board, probably more in private practice now than we have seen in the last 5 to 8, maybe 10 years. But certainly in-house is incredibly busy across all areas of law, privacy focus, corporate commercial, securities. We're even seeing more litigation and employment focused roles in-house than we've seen in the past. And I would say it's across quite a wide range of industries as well. Some of the ones that we've seen a lot, probably since January, are technology, both established companies and startups, CPG companies, anything retail focused, manufacturing, banking and fintech, real estate investment trusts, insurance, pharma, and construction. So it's kind of across the gamut. I would say the majority of the opportunities that are available are probably in that 2 to 7 year range. But we've also been working on some very senior level general counsel roles, assistant corporate secretary roles. And we are starting to see more people making that switch with just 1 year post-call experience. And I don't know if that is in part a product of the pandemic and, you know, doing your first year as an associate completely remote.
Oops, I just had myself on mute. Yeah, I think that's, I mean, that's great news for everyone here who's looking. I think that's very helpful and interesting to see, again, that 1 to 3 years we have in our mind is not necessarily as accurate. Okay, so I'll take one more question, I guess, like formal question, and then we can chat about some of the questions that have come through the chat as well. I want to address the topic of diversity. I understand that, of course, this varies from company to company, but we'll ask about whether the legal industry as a whole is making progress in the area of diversity and inclusion. How does that play out in an in-house setting? Maybe I can ask this question to Iris and then Stephanie, and anyone else, of course, who has thoughts to share on that, because I know it's a big question, but it's one that we definitely need to keep our sort of hand on the pulse there.
So I think in terms of diversity and inclusion, there is certainly more focus on that in the last 5 years, I would say, compared to when I first started. And certainly, you know, on Bay Street and in the corporate world, I think we still have some way to go, unfortunately, but we are starting to make some progress. What I would emphasize is, I think in terms of people who are looking to make moves, I've already indicated that, you know, do your homework. This is, again, an area where I think you have to do some research before applying for a position and before making the move. So again, speak to people in your network, ask lots of questions, I think, in your interview, targeted to getting answers on the culture and the work environment, and understanding whether the organization that you work for might have a diversity and inclusion policy. I think that's important. And if possible, I would also, in addition to people that you meet in interviews, see if there might be opportunities to meet with people in the team to understand the mix and you know, whom you might be working with. And that will also give you a sense as to diversity and inclusion. Somebody has told me to look out for the plants in the office when you are in the office, and you can return, because apparently if it's a happy environment, the plants thrive. I don't know if that's true or not, but I've also heard that when I was going around looking for a job. So that could also be something that you can look for, not in the virtual world, clearly, but when you can meet people in person.
I like that. We can see that Sam has a lovely happy plant in her background. So she's obviously doing well. I'll turn it over to Steph as well.
I think that, yeah, in terms of diversity and inclusion, yes, a lot of work is being done. And I think that in-house legal departments are taking the lead in that work. I know that where I was and where I currently am at RBC, we have started to request or to impose on outside counsel that the teams that they assign to our files be diversified. Like, this is a requirement that a lot of in-house groups or legal departments are starting to impose, and I think that's amazing. One of the things I would look into when joining a legal team to make sure that the diversity is at the core of that team, not just the company, because sometimes, you know, the diversity goals are at the company level, but not necessarily within your group. A lot of legal departments, there's a lot of women in-house somehow. Don't ask me why. Well, we probably know why, right? Historically, but it's not rare, or it wasn't rare to see a legal department where most colleagues are women. There's one man, and that man is the general counsel. It's becoming, we see it less and less, but back when I started, it was the norm. It was women everywhere except the general counsel. And I know that a few years ago, when I was reporting into the director of legal, and he quit the company, and I was speaking with the VP, and he's like, "Oh, we need a new Alex." Alex was his name. Like, what do you mean by a new Alex? You know, what are you looking for? He's like, you know, someone like cocky and arrogant, and who can stand up to Walmart's general counsel. And I was like, is that your idea of a general counsel? Somehow the business and some business people still have in mind that, you know, it takes a man of a certain age, a white old man, to stand up to another white old man in a similar role in a different company, which is absolutely ridiculous. The good news, though, is that right now, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but 5 of the biggest banks currently have women as general counsel, including RBC, BMO, TD, I'm not remember, Scotia, female general counsel. These are all first. So there's definitely a lot of hope here.
That's great. I think that's a couple of great examples of how in-house is actually leading the way in that respect. So very good to know. All of us can take a hint from that. I'm going to ask some of the questions. I don't know if the panelists have access to the Q&A, but I'll read them out, the questions that we have. There's 2 of them. The first one is, Is the responsibility and time commitment of a senior in-house counsel GC comparable to a partner in a private practice firm? And the second one is, oh, sorry, there's actually more coming in as we talk. The second one is the importance of a good mentor, was mentioned earlier. How do mentees go about finding someone great that is willing to take the time to mentor us? That's a great question. And do you have any tips to decipher which company is the right fit for you? So maybe I will just open that up to the panelists, and you can, if there's a particular question that you feel called to answer, then please jump in. Otherwise, we can sort of break them down one by one. Is there anyone that, I see you, Sam. Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, so maybe I'll kick things off. So the question on, do you have any tips to decipher which company is the right fit for you? I think what we've heard, during this panel is that when you go in-house, you're picking the company, and then you really take that deep dive and you learn that business end to end. So the question then becomes, what types of companies, what kind of industries are doing the things that are of interest to you? So if you know that you don't have an interest in, boating, just as an example, you shouldn't be really like looking at those, but looking at it from a high level, and then at least just isolating, okay, maybe this, and then figuring out what that probing looks like afterwards will probably make it feel less overwhelming. So a lot of it is this search that is very individualized. And I think, Stephanie, you mentioned before, purpose, figuring out what you enjoy, because, once you do decide to go to a certain industry, you're learning a lot there. It's not to say you wouldn't switch, but it's a very meaningful commitment. So pick something that is of interest to you. It sparks a little bit of joy. It's aligned with your professional and personal interests. And then start reaching out to people in the industry. So LinkedIn, super powerful tool. So you can see all the different points of connection and even reach out to someone who knows someone else to just even have that conversation. It's a little more challenging now in the, COVID world and working remotely, but whatever you can do to get that information and hear from someone what it's actually like working at a company, working in an industry, it's going to help you. Knowledge is power. So do your research, take your time, take your time and think about it thoughtfully. I guess that would be my response to that one.
That's such a great response. I mean, if I just may add something, not in terms of the response, but to contextualize this COVID period. We used to, choose, there was a lot of criteria that came into place when we were picking a company before, right? Is it downtown? I want to work downtown. I want my own office, or I want, all this is disappearing. So in a COVID context where at the end of the day, what's linking you, what's tying you, but I started my role completely remote. I have never met any single of my colleagues, right? And so what's my link to the company is 100% the culture. And my way of determining what that culture is, what kind of companies, what have they done? What stands have they taken publicly? Where do they invest? What type of, when I came, like what type of relationship have I been able to build even remotely? In COVID, that's all we have. And and a lot of companies, it becomes very easy to realize when there's no fit, because if you are alone at home and you just, what do I have? I have a laptop and that's my only link to the company. If you're not feeling it, it's not gonna work. So, yeah.
So Anastasia, I might jump in and answer the first question that Anna asked.
Please do. I'm just going to pause one moment. I noticed it's 7:30. If people need to jump off, please do. But otherwise, I think we'll probably just stay and answer a couple of questions, because I think there's lots of good ideas here. So go ahead, Christina.
I think from a time commitment, I would say yes. And from a responsibility commitment, I would say more so. If you're a GC or in-house counsel, and you're providing legal advice and being a trusted advisor, and your responsibility to your clients internally, I think would feel greater. I mean, you're part of a team altogether. So I think I guess it would depend obviously on the person, but I certainly think it would be comparable. I don't know, Iris, if you have any thoughts on that, but I know that, before I left GM, and I've been there, 25 to 30 years, I certainly felt a great responsibility to my clients, the work that I did, the role of trusted advisor, and yeah, I think it's the same or more.
I agree with that, but I think the time commitment is also slightly different, right? When you are in private practice, you are trying to develop business. So you spend time, whether it's writing articles, making sure you build a profile in the area of law that you practice in, or, in some cases, spending quality time with your external clients. So it's not work per se, but it's a different type of work. It's a necessary part of your practice, and you have to absolutely do it, and it takes time, but it's not the type of work that, the traditional type of work of a trusted advisor, which, Christina referred to. So it's still work, but it's just a different type of work.
Iris, I'm going to jump in because there's a question for you specifically in the chat function, and it says, my question is for Iris specifically. How easy was it to go from in-house back to private practice? So I wonder if you can answer that question.
I think it's hard. The docketing part takes a lot of getting used to, but certainly myself plus a fair number of people that I know have made the jump from in-house to private practice. I think it's doable. I think you have to pick your opportunity, right? Like, you have to make sure an in-house role that you find yourself in is an experience, a positive experience, and adds to your toolbox. Because I think a lot of the skills that you learn as well when you're in-house are very transferable. And in fact makes you a better lawyer because you've been on the side of the fence, and you know what in-house lawyers appreciate, or what irritate them. So I think the experience certainly is something that prepares you and makes you a better lawyer when you make the jump into private practice.
Thank you. I maybe we'll answer the mentorship question and then close up for the evening, because I noticed we're a little over time, and small people need us. So we will just with a note to that before I turn it over for the mentorship question. We will, if you have any questions specifically for any of the wonderful panelists, please do just send them into the YWL email. We can always sort of facilitate a connection there to have further conversations if people have questions that they wanted to ask and didn't have the opportunity to do that. So with that, maybe we'll finish off with the mentorship question, the importance of finding a good mentor. I believe it was Christina who talked about that. And how do mentees go about finding someone that is willing to take them on as a mentor or mentee, I suppose?
Some companies have formal programs for mentorship. So that'd be one way. Informal mentors, find someone that you connect with and talk to them and ask them, would you mind, the word mentor is too scary. Would you mind giving me some tips every once in a while? And you can work into that type of relationship. You can ask your supervisor, is there someone you think would be a good mentor for me? If you need help in a certain area, you can always ask HR. You could ask your colleague, depending, like, do you know anyone you think would be a good fit with me? And I know at one point I was involved in a formal mentoring process where they had just put me with someone who I didn't know, and it was like it bombed because there was no real connection there. So I think to be able to get someone that can connect to you personally is important. And informal mentorships sometimes are the best kinds. You just have to look around the organization and speak up. This is one point I think where you do have to speak up for yourself and either talk to your supervisor or talk to that person or talk to HR and say, you know, I really would like a mentor, and, you know, would you be interested? Or, you know, or just call someone and say, hey, I was wondering about your area. Maybe I could buy you a cup of coffee.
Yeah, I think those are all great tips. As someone who's sort of, when I was at the beginning of my career and I was looking for a good fit for a firm, I found that very helpful. Just like, can I buy you a coffee? And I appreciate maybe that's not the most practical in a virtual, but can we have a coffee Zoom and I can ask you some questions. So I think that's great. Great advice.
I think, Anastasia, that in virtual it's even easier actually. I've never seen, and that's how I found a lot of my mentors and some of the people that I mentor, just LinkedIn. Hey, can we have a Zoom intro coffee, virtual coffee, etc. It's easier to commit to, you know, a 30-minute meeting someone over Zoom than to actually go physically and, you know, make an appointment in person and go for a coffee. So don't be scared to reach out. The worst that can happen is the person saying no, right? And the best that can happen is you actually, you know, finding that you have a great connection with that person, or that person is willing to spend that time on you. So LinkedIn is an amazing resource. Don't hesitate to invest in a LinkedIn, like a paying LinkedIn account, $30 per month, but you're able to just reach out to a lot of people and send messages without being connected, and just send a bottle in the ocean and see what comes back. You may be very surprised with what comes back.
That's a fabulous answer. I also know that's actually one of the answers to the remaining questions. So that was perfect. And sorry, I talked over someone who was about to jump in with
Oh, Stace, I was just going to say, you know, there's establishing the mentor relationship, and then there's nurturing it and letting it grow. And you know, the best mentors that I have, you reap what you sow, right? Like whatever you put in, you kind of get back twofold. So it's challenging, but nurturing that, like any relationship, it'll pay off.
Excellent. Thank you all. I can't thank you enough for all of this amazing advice, information, guidance. It's certainly been eye-opening for me. I'm sure it's been very, very helpful for everyone who's online. We still have a large number of people who stayed right till the end. We were 10 minutes over. So thank you all so much for your time and your wisdom. If people have extra questions, oh, sorry, Christina, go ahead. Oh, it was a wave. It was a wave. Sorry.
I imagine most of us. I imagine most of us are on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. So if anyone has a specific question for one of us, they could always send it that way as well.
That's a fabulous idea. Yeah.
I bet Lana's going to get lots of questions and maybe some resumes. What do you think, Lana?
I think that may be the case. And we also had everyone who attended should have gotten the bios as well. So you have everyone's information to where to find them. So either send us a question to them or directly, or you can send it through us at YWL, and we'll do our best to make sure it gets where it needs to go. So thank you all so much. It's been really wonderful. Enjoy your evenings. And thank you for attending our virtual event.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good luck, you young lawyers.
Have a good night.
Bye.